insurance. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because I hope you already know it, but just in case, let me say that when your buyer applies to go get his homeowner's insurance, the insurance company is going to check something called the CLUE report, CLUE. It stands for Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Evaluation. So it's CLUE. If you want to go into and Google on your computer when you get a minute, CLUE report, it'll give you more information about this. So what happens when they check the CLUE report is if the homeowner, or even previous homeowners, because it goes back 7 years, has filed claims on their homeowner's insurance. So I own the house, you're buying it. You're going to get insurance on the house I'm selling you. If I have filed a lot of insurance claims on my property, your insurance goes up. If you have filed claims on your previous property, your insurance might go up. So when the lender did the buyer's pre-qualification and they've calculated what their PITI was, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, they looked at what would insurance be on a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2-story in Lombard, et cetera, built out of what? I don't care, brick, straw, wood, whatever it's built out of. That's what they calculated it on. So let's say they assumed that the insurance was going to be, or they calculated it on the insurance being $1,000 a year. And now you're buying my house and I filed 3 claims in the last 5 years against 2 of them for water damage and 1 of them for something else, who cares what. I'm going to tell you that your buyer's insurance could be $2,000 a year, if not more than that. Is it possible that your buyer no longer qualifies? And the answer is yes. Most buyers wait until right before their closing, after they've gotten their loan approval, based on the $1,000 a year homeowner's insurance. Then 3 days before the closing, they go get their insurance and find out it's $2,000. Now the lender says, well, we can't close. And now your buyer's going to lose his earnest money because he's no longer protected by his loan contingency. So what this is saying, I know it took a long time for a very short paragraph, but what this is saying is that your buyer needs to call his insurance company in the first 10 days, here's that 10 business days again, to make sure and call and say, I'm buying 412 Elm Street in Lombard, and how much will my insurance be? They'll check the CLUE report for him. They'll come back and tell him. And if he says that's way too high, I don't want it, he can still get out of this contract during that 10 days. If he does not do it and he just waits till right before, he could be sitting there with a house he can't close on, or a house he can still afford, but his insurance is twice as high as he thought it should be. Okay, so make sure you point this out to them. And we have something that you can use if there are forms available from, they're not really forms, they're checklists from your association or from your brokerage company that run you through the due diligence dates in this contract. And you need to be putting those due diligence dates into a format for your buyers to make sure that they hit all these dates. Because if they don't hit all of these dates, they could either end up losing the house or losing their earnest money in some way. So make sure they check on that. The next one is the flood insurance. And the buyer has the right to declare the contract null and void if the real estate is located in a special flood hazard area. Now, I know that on the seller disclosure form, it says property, to the best of my knowledge, the property is or is not in a flood area. What I want to tell you is that those people have lived in their house for a number of years. They're going to check a box, and very honestly checking the box that says, to the best of their knowledge, it's not in a flood area. It's not in a flood zone. FEMA has changed the flood zones in Northern Illinois. I can't even count how many times now in the last 10 years. These people might not even know they're in a flood zone. They bought the house and it wasn't. The lenders typically don't go back and ask for them to get flood insurance unless it's a disaster. So they might not know they're in a flood zone. So they should be checking this out. So it says within 10 business days after the date of acceptance or by the loan contingency date. So I would say to you that if the buyer's getting a loan, he does not need to check his flood insurance within that 10 days. It will be checked by either the appraiser or it will be done by the attorney. It will be done by somebody in order to get the loan. If the buyer is paying cash for this property, then he needs to check to see whether or not it's in a flood zone, because it's the lender that typically makes sure that there's flood insurance on the property. So if there's no loan involved, they really need to do it within that 10 days. Okay, the next paragraph. I am not spending a lot of time on this with you. I want to just say to you, this is if this is a condominium or it's a common interest association. It happens, it's condos, townhouses, single family homes that have homeowners associations. And there's it's pretty self-explanatory. But basically what it says is that after the seller will make sure that the buyer gets all of the rules and the regs and the documents that show what it is that any kind of restrictions on the property. And if you look at D, seller has 10 business days from the date of acceptance to apply for any items of disclosure that they have to get. So again, here's our 10 business days again. And the seller is going to get and provide those and make sure that the buyer gets them. And when you look at the next page, what it says is, in the event the documents provided by the seller to the buyer show that the improvements are in violation of existing rules or regulations or whatever, or more importantly, that the terms in the documents would unreasonably restrict the buyer's use of the real estate or result in financial obligations unacceptable to the buyer, they can, with 5 business days notice, tell them that they are not going through with this contract. So, example, my buyer is an investor. He wants to rent out this condo, and the docs come back and show us that he cannot rent it out because either the rules have changed and the rentals are all grandfathered, but no new buyers can rent anything. That could happen. Or it comes back and they say, we've already reached our percentage of rental units. If we go past that percentage, we will have trouble getting any kind of Fannie Mae financing on this property, not to mention FHA or VA. Then my buyer says, I don't want it. So the buyer has a right to walk away I forgot the bigger one. It comes back showing that there's a lawsuit against the association, or there's some kind of financial reason why this is going to cost him more than he thought it was. So just know that your buyer will have the ability to look at all those docs and will have the ability to say, this ain't for me, and move on from there, okay? And that the seller has to provide all of those docs as well. So this is the paragraph that says the seller is going to convey a good and merchantable title to the real estate by a recordable warranty deed, yada, yada, yada. And I'm saying yada to you because that's kind of how you're going to explain it to your buyers. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, this is the paragraph that says you'll get a deed to the property. When you go through this contract with your buyer, you have to explain it. And I don't think there's a couple of paragraphs, this being one of them, that's all you got to say. This is, you'll get a deed to the property, all right? The next one has to do with municipal ordinance and transfer taxes and stuff like that. There are some municipalities in the Chicagoland area that have pre-closing inspections or disclosure requirements, or they have municipal transfer taxes. Those fees, the expenses for those inspections, et cetera, are going to be paid for by the party designated in the ordinance. And your buyers need to be aware of this, and so do your sellers. So what's our responsibility? If I'm a listing agent, I need to know whether or not the property I am listing is in a town that has a municipal ordinance or a transfer tax. And there are a variety of different places you can find this. Talk to your managing brokers about that. It's on websites of some of the attorneys, on some of the associations. You will be able to find it. And then I need to make sure that my seller understands that before we can close on this property, he has to have this inspection done. There are transfer taxes that are sometimes paid by the seller and sometimes paid by the buyer. So both of us, as a buyer agent and as a listing agent, need to be aware of what are the transfer taxes or any kind of other taxes, inspection fees, etc., that have to be paid. Sometimes it's not a lot of money. In a couple of municipalities, we've got just a water discharge fee of $60. Somebody from the water department comes out to make sure that nobody is dumping anything into the sewer systems in that city that don't belong dumped into the sewer systems. So it's just make your clients aware if there's anything like that. It also says that the parties have to agree to FIRPTA. And the Real Estate Settlement and Procedure and RESPA, but the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, they have to be, they have to abide by that. So it also says that the parties have to agree to comply with FIRPTA. And what FIRPTA is, because some of you may not remember it off the top of your head, it's the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. And what it says is that a buyer has to withhold 10% of the amount realized by the foreign seller in the sale of an interest in U.S. real property. So all we're saying here is that everybody has to comply with that if in fact, and we don't, thank goodness, have to worry about this. It's just the attorneys are going to do this. It's just in the contract because it has to be there so everybody knows they have to abide by FIRPTA, as well as RESPA and other issues. Okay. So this is one of those similar to the deed. This says that, and believe me, we are not going to go through all of this. At the seller's expense, they're going to deliver to the buyer or buyer's attorney within customary time limitations and sufficiently in advance of the closing and evidence of a title that is clear. That means that there are no encroachments, that there are no survey matters, there's nothing there's no liens on the property that would cause the seller to not be able to give clear title and a warranty deed to the buyer. So this is just to make sure that everybody understands the legalities of all of that. So when going through this with your client, that's pretty much how you would explain it. This is to make sure, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you know that you're going to be getting a clear title, and this outlines how the seller has to go about doing that. And when I'm going through it with my seller, I'm basically telling him the same thing. This is showing that you are responsible, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, for clearing any liens that are on this title prior to the closing, because if there are any and you can't deliver the deed, then we have a problem. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to learn about what those liens might be pretty early in the transaction. All right, so next, the survey, not less than 1 business day prior to the closing, except in a condo situation. Seller is going to furnish the survey, and the seller is going to pay for the survey. And it's going to be no more than 6 months prior to the date of closing. So all of this and all of the corners on the survey have to be staked and flagged. And it is just a requirement that the seller provides a survey paid for by the seller, and it has to be there prior to the closing. Okay, so the buyer will get a survey. This is the statement that the seller has to leave the real estate in broom clean condition. All refuse and personal property that is not going to be left for the buyer has to be removed at the seller's expense prior to the possession. Buyer has the right to inspect the property. So this is where we say the buyer has the right to do a walkthrough. We do not put any time limitations on the walkthrough. The buyer could do it the day before, he could do it the week before, he could do the morning of. Talk to your managing brokers about in your marketplace, what's the customary time when the walkthrough is done. It is usually done the morning of the closing or the day before, generally never much further away from the closing than that. And this is, and I mentioned this earlier about the Viking range and the Sub-Zero refrigerator, where I said some people will write those in, but we have some place where it says the seller can't switch them. And it says they're doing this walkthrough to inspect the real estate, the fixtures, and included personal property prior to possession to verify that the improvements in included personal property are in substantially the same condition as of the date of acceptance, normal wear and tear accepted. Well, you can't switch something because then it's not in the same condition it was as of the date of acceptance. So you can still write it in back there on paragraph 3 if you choose to, but we're going to make sure that the seller's not switching stuff out on you.